Least to set there. And much activity going on, of course, at the United Nations in New York today as well. Zalmay Khalilzad is the US ambassador to the UN, and in the past half hour or so, he's been speaking there.
We must condemn Russia's military assault on the sovereign state of Georgia, the violation of the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity, including the targeting of civilians and the campaign of terror against the Georgian population. Similarly, we need to condemn the destruction of Georgian infrastructure. Third, the Council must do what it can to ensure adherence with the provisions of the Charter and take actions to address this threat to international peace and security. This means respect for Article 2, Paragraph 4, which calls for all UN members to refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. Therefore, we believe the Council needs to take urgent action calling for an immediate ceasefire and the withdrawal of all forces to the status quo of August 6th.
And that's the US ambassador to the UN, Zalmay Khalilzad, speaking. Let's go live now to New York, to the United Nations, and speak to our correspondent there, Tom Lane. So, Tom, there have been some pretty incendiary words flying around there in New York today so far. What's the very latest that's happening?
Well, the very latest is that the Council has finished and is going into what's known as a meeting of the experts. It's kind of the legal bods who are going to meet behind closed doors, and they're going to try to thrash out some sort of language in a resolution. Now, what's unclear is exactly what that language is going to say. From the US, from what we've been hearing from Khalilzad as you were just playing, it sounds like they're going to try to advance a resolution which will condemn Russia, which will essentially be a symbolic gesture because Russia could veto it. However, there are other diplomats here who are saying that there's still a lot of intent to try to get a compromise resolution, something about language of a ceasefire that perhaps all parties could accept.
Yes, but you mentioned there the Russian veto, obviously, as a member of the Permanent Five on the Security Council. It has that veto. So where can the UN really go from here when Russia is highly unlikely to agree to any sort of wording that criticises it?
Exactly, that's a key point. I mean, the Permanent Five on the Security Council were essentially the victors of World War II. The idea of the Security Council was that it was meant to keep an eye on states like Germany and Japan, which at the time all the people agreed were a threat. Now, of course, we've got a case where one of the members of the Permanent Five is an aggressor, essentially, in this situation. It is a party in a war. There isn't much that the Security Council can do to bring active force to clamp this situation down until Russia thinks it's in its own best interests.
A little earlier, the US ambassador was accusing Russia of impeding the withdrawal of Georgian forces from South Ossetia. Are they still going along that line, or have they changed their position on that?
The US are still actually being very vocal against Russia. Khalilzad just came to the stakeout moments ago, and he said that Russia had a nostalgia for the past, which meant that it was thinking that, as in the old days, it was a good thing to overthrow democratically elected regimes by force. So there isn't any ramp down in the tensions in terms of the words being used here at all.
No ramp down in tensions in terms of the words, Tom, but do you get any sense behind the scenes that they're making some sort of progress and that these words are really just for public consumption at this stage?
That's certainly what the Russian ambassador was saying. He was accusing Khalilzad of using propaganda that he was essentially implying would help in presidential elections in America rather than help in diplomatic efforts. Yes, potentially some. There are some diplomats from other delegations who've been telling us that they really want to create some sort of more generic anodyne text, perhaps even referencing this thing, the Olympic truce, which the General Assembly of the UN called upon, where states aren't meant to fight during the Olympics. There's a lot of intent here to try to pass something that will at least be able to bind all parties together. And what will be interesting will be to see whether that wins out over the desire of other parties to have a symbolic gesture.
OK, I'm sure you'll keep a close eye on that for us, Tom. Tom Lane there at the UN in New York. Thank you very much.